All right, man, peace. So, brothers, the night is finally here. Hopefully now we'll have the opportunity to finally be able to decipher and discern exactly how great of a welterweight champion is Mr. Terence Bud Crawford. Because as I've stated in other videos, I perceive Shawn Porter to be a quote-unquote truth machine fighter. Meaning he's someone who's so dogged, determined, and well-conditioned that his opponent has no other recourse but to show exactly what he brings to the table himself. Shawn Porter is going to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt how great a fighter Mr. Terence Crawford actually is, or isn't. We'll see. But in all fairness to Terence Crawford, should he dominate Mr. Shawn Porter, which presumably he won't, but if he does, let's be careful not to frame the narrative as, well, Shawn Porter has fell off. We must be willing to give Terence Bud Crawford the credit that he deserves. But I'm not anticipating that to happen. I think that Shawn Porter is going to bring the heat. I think that Terence Bud Crawford is also going to bring the heat. And Shawn's going to have to be very careful because he does tend to be a fighter who opens up very wide, especially with his hooks. And sometimes, if he's not careful, he can begin a hook from too far out and lead with his chin in the air. And if he does that too much against a fighter of Terence Bud Crawford's quality, he is going to get dropped multiple times and maybe stopped. So this, I would say, is probably the most dangerous fighter that Shawn Porter has ever faced. But we'll see. We'll find out. Maybe after the fight, we'll think differently. Maybe after the fight, we'll say Errol Spence did better against Shawn Porter than Terence Crawford did. Because Terence Crawford, he won the fight by an even slimmer margin than Errol Spence did. Who knows? But we're going to find out on Saturday night. Now, what are the keys of victory for Mr. Shawn Porter? I always like to start with the keys of victory for the quote-unquote underdog fighter. I think that the key to victory for Shawn Porter is to make sure that he does not get countered too cleanly by Terence Crawford. And that means what? He's going to have to set up his punches with a lot of feints. Make sure that he's defensively responsible and that he gets in and gets out of exchange range with crispness. Very important. If he lags even a little bit, he could get sniped. He could get dropped. He could get stopped. I'm sure that his father is making sure that Shawn Porter grasps the importance of everything in their training camp when it comes to what they're entering into the ring against. Even Errol Spence is not as well schooled in regards to the execution of combination punching leading to stoppages as Terence Crawford is. Errol Spence is a great fighter. He's a wear you down fighter who tries to bring you into the buzzsaw of constant combinations to the body, concerted attacks to the body. Terence Crawford's different. He can take you out to the head, he can take you out to the body. He can fight going backward. He can fight coming forward. Now, Errol can do a lot of those things too. But Errol, I'm not quite sure, is as focused at this point in his career as Terence Crawford is. And I don't think that he executes many of his offensive strategies with the level of sharpness that a Terence Crawford does. So from that standpoint, I think that he's going to be a bit more dangerous for Shawn Porter than Errol Spence was. But we're going to find out once again. Shawn Porter is going to have to make sure that Terence Crawford is not able to extend on his punches too much. Make sure that he crowds him, especially on the ropes. Tries to wear him down to the body and hope that over the course of the fight, that can create some openings. Maybe in the middle rounds, he can catch Terence Crawford with something, maybe drop him. Terence Crawford has been dropped before. So if other fighters have dropped him, Mean Machine dropped him. So a Mean Machine can drop Terence Crawford. I'm sure that Shawn Porter thinks he can drop Terence Crawford because this is probably going to be his greatest test at welterweight. Juan Benavidez was a very talented fighter, but we all know that he was hampered by the leg injury. So heading into this fight, I think that I won't say most, probably damn near all, will assume that Shawn Porter is going to be Terence Crawford's toughest fight to date in the 147-pound division. Now, we saw what Terence Crawford did to Kell Brook, and Kell Brook was able to defeat Shawn Porter. But Kell has not really been the same since those back-to-back fights against Triple G and Errol Spence. So it's difficult to really gauge. But I do give Terence Crawford all the credit in the world, because many people were asking whether or not he would fight Kell Brook, just to look for a name fighter at welter. So he did that, and he dominated, so he deserves credit. But we know that Kell's not quite the same. Shawn Porter, on the other hand, if he's able to dominate Shawn Porter, especially with the way in which he's always in tune with his body and always in great condition, that will arguably be the most celebrated victory of Terence Crawford's career, especially if he can do it in dominating fashion. If he can dominate Shawn Porter, that will definitely sway the argument of who will win that hypothetical match between Terence Crawford and Errol Spence. But just getting back to the breakdown of the fight, Shawn is going to have to make sure that he's very responsible defensively, which sometimes he can forget to be. Terence is probably going to be the hardest puncher that he's ever faced at welter. And Shawn has faced some hard punchers at welter. He's faced Keith Thurman. He's faced Danny Garcia. He's faced Yordenis Ugas. He's faced Errol Spence. Faced a lot of hard punchers. He faced Pacquiao in sparring. But still, I think that Terence is going to prove to be the hardest puncher that he's faced to date at 147. I did notice against Kell Brook that Terence appeared to be a bit slow with his feet. That could be something that Shawn may take advantage of. Now, the fight against Kell was very brief. So who knows, maybe Terence entered into the fight saying, I'm going to press him early to see what he's got. I want to see if his face holds up under the barrage of punches that I'm going to unleash because of the damage that he's taken in previous fights against Errol Spence and Triple G. So I don't want to make too much of how stationary he was, but it was something that I noticed and I'll be watching for in this fight against Shawn Porter. Because if you're too stationary against Shawn, you're going to have a hell of a night. You just are. Terence is going to have to be able to maneuver in the ring to set himself up for the counters. Now, I want to see that when and if he attempts to lead against Shawn, how Shawn responds. His head movement is going to have to be very good. He's going to have to be able to impose his will physically on Terence. I'm sure that Terence is expecting bully tactics from Shawn, including headbutts, rabbit punches, kidney punches, things of that sort. Shawn is going to need all that if he intends to win. He's going to need all that. And I'm sure that Terence will be looking for that. Shawn is going to have to keep Terence off balance. When he gets him in corners, trap him in there. Don't let that guy get out and set you up, for a counter, short uppercut or left hooks in close that could wobble you. Because Terence is that dangerous. In the middle of the ring, Shawn is going to have to make sure that he does not engage in those lunging tactics where he gets desperate to get in close. Because at every moment, Terence is going to be looking to counter him with something very hard. So I'm not quite sure if this is a fight that Shawn can win unless he hurts Terence seriously at some point in the fight. Because on a purely boxing basis, it's not even close. Terence Crawford is a way better pure boxer than Shawn Porter is. But Shawn does have a chance if he utilizes certain tactics and if he's able to put up with Terence as a puncher. But he's going to have to, bring forth a very concerted body attack to try to make Terence's power dissipate over the course of the fight if he can. And once again, if Mean Machine can drop Terence, I believe that Shawn Porter can if he utilizes the right tactics, which is concerted body attack and then try to come up top, maybe in the middle part of the fight. But early on, it has to be hard body shots. Now, Shawn is not known for being a necessarily great puncher, but he is very strong. So, at the end of the day, if he commits, Terence is going to feel it. He's going to know about it. Now, what are the keys for Terence Crawford? Pretty much just be him. Just be him, assuming that he hasn't fallen off the wagon. I mean, he's about 33, 34 years old. Assuming that he's still relatively the same fighter. Just be you. Educated jab. Switching stances. Setting up your opponent for hard shots. Putting together beautiful, crisp combinations to the head and the body. I mean, as of right now, in my view, Terence Crawford has a very good chance of being the first person to ever stop Shawn Porter. Am I going to predict that? No. because Shawn's never been stopped before. So it's going to be difficult for me to predict a stoppage. But what I will say is that I think that Terence is going to show himself to be the discernibly better fighter over the course of 12 rounds, and that he may even drop Shawn a couple of times in the fight. And who knows, if he's able to put together some hard combinations later on in the fight, he might be the first guy to stop Shawn. I just don't think that Shawn is going to be able to bring enough to the table to do enough to win a fight against Terence Crawford unless he can hurt him multiple times in the middle of the fight to get him off balance. Maybe a headbutt can open up a cut and he can capitalize. But the thing with Terence is that the man hits so hard. He's such a hard puncher that it's very dangerous to utilize the tactics that Shawn Porter normally utilizes against fighters. Terence is a way crisper puncher than Errol Spence is. Errol Spence might have more blunt force to his blows than Terence Crawford, but Terence's punches are so sharp and powerful that the vast majority of his opponents, they have to take a knee at some point in the fight. And I do see that coming for Shawn Porter. At some point, he's going to have to take a knee due to some of the body shots that Terence Crawford is going to unleash on him. So the test is going to be whether or not Shawn Porter can grit his way through until the finish and make the fight close enough to be disputable. But I just don't see him winning a decision, and I don't see him being able to stop Terence Crawford. But who knows? Strange things happen. Shawn is very competitive. He's someone who believes in himself. His father believes in him. And Shawn did perform better against Errol Spence than I expected him to perform. But this is definitely a fight that I'm looking forward to. This was a very important fight for the legacy of Mr. Terence Crawford, not because of who he's fighting, but because of what he's establishing. That being that this notion that fights, quote unquote, on the other side of the street can't be made. It was important for his career that he put his neck out there to establish that I'm not the one who's perpetuating this excuse. So now that the fight has been made with Shawn Porter, should he defeat Shawn Porter, maybe he can call out Yordenis Ugas and really put the pressure on Errol Spence once Errol Spence comes back from his eye surgery. But I've never liked this tack from Terence Crawford of, I'm not going to, quote unquote, lower myself to negotiate with Errol Spence, or, the split of the purse is not right because of what I've accomplished in boxing. It's like, bro, at the end of the day, Errol Spence is a bigger name in boxing than yours. Not by much, but you must understand that Top Rank does a terrible job of promoting Bud Crawford. They just do. Bob has never really understood how to promote black fighters. They've always had to promote themselves. Ray Leonard, for the most part, he worked through Bob Arum and to a degree Don King, but he promoted himself. Ray had a lawyer, a professional lawyer that helped to promote him. Muhammad Ali promoted himself, even though he was under Bob Arum. Bob Arum had Marvin Hagler. Marvin Hagler had to come up with ideas to promote himself, changing his name to Marvelous legally, things like that. Bob has never understood how to promote black fighters. That's why Floyd Mayweather left his stable. So at the end of the day, Terence, I think, has become too comfortable with having Bob Arum be able to find locations for him to fight at and just giving him a check. And I hope that at the end of his career, he's not one of these guys who complains that Bob stiffed him when it came to the money. I hope that that's not the case with him. But when it comes to this fight, my official prediction is Terence Bud Crawford by unanimous decision, or maybe late round stoppage, rounds 10 or 11, somewhere around there. I just don't see anything that Shawn's going to be able to do to defeat Terence unless Terence has aged, or unless maybe Terence is just not able to deal with the pressure. But there's going to be, so much of a buzzsaw that he's going to have to work his way through. I'm talking about Shawn Porter. He's going to have to work his way through so much when it comes to the counters and presumably the footwork just to get inside, that I don't think that he's going to be able to pile up any rounds over the course of the fight. So once again, my prediction is Terence Bud Crawford by late round stoppage or by unanimous decision. So peace.